Hello, everyone. My name is Stephanie Broxton, and welcome to the Smarter Together webinar series. This webinar series touches upon how multidisciplinary applied research can be used to make an impact and improve the human condition. Before we begin, I would like to remind all audience members to mute your audio and video throughout the duration of the presentation. We highly encourage you to drop questions for our speakers in the chat box as they occur to you, so our presenters can address them during the Q&A portion of the presentation. Now, I would like to welcome Greg McCormick, the director of the Georgia Smart Communities Challenge, to introduce the project that is the subject of today's webinar.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Thanks for that warm introduction, and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today on this Thursday afternoon. Today, we're going to be hearing from Clayton County's team. This is the second of 4 communities who've been working with Georgia Tech and our partners over the past year as part of the Georgia Smart program. Again, this is a technical and financial assistantship and grant that these communities applied for over a year ago and were selected to participate in. So we've really enjoyed working with Jason Brookins and his team down in Clayton County on their Smart Pedestrian project, and we're really looking forward to hearing from them today in their final presentation to talk about their project and their results, and their partnership with a Georgia Tech research team throughout this past year. So I'd like to welcome Jason, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Stephanie. I appreciate that. And so I will go ahead and share my screen, and we will get started. Okay, can everybody see it?
Yes, we can. Thanks, Jason.
Awesome. Okay. So this year, we were afforded the opportunity to compete for and was awarded our project proposal to create or to start the steps of making a smart pedestrian plan for Clayton County. So our project team, our initial project team was concentrated, but as with any great projects, they grow over time. And so I'll recognize all of our team members. So our project sponsor is the Clayton County's Chief Operating Officer, Dietrich Stanford. Again, my name is Jason Brookins. I am the project lead. Keith Rowling is Clayton County's Assistant Director of Transportation and Development. Nicole Horn is our administrator of the Youth Services Division of our Board of Commissioners. And then we have our Georgia Tech researchers, Dr. Arthi Rao. She was our primary researcher we worked with the most. But coming in a close second was Dr. Randall Gunzler. And so working with them and with Dr. Ross, we had a really good experience and made a great team. I would just like to acknowledge some of our others who joined in as the project went on and we needed their expertise. Nicole's staff in Youth Services, Kimberly Bradley and Sierra Dunn, along with my chief of staff, Cody Law, and our GIS people, or our GIS team, James Patterson and Chandler White. We had Micah Bray assisted us with our student data gathering and that whole part of it. He was a tremendous help.
Hold on to the call in the system.
And we did have 28 high school students that we hired and did a bulk of the data gathering for us. And then this summer, we had the opportunity to have 2 interns from the Smart Community Corps, Dimitri Finch and June Wang, who were critical at the end. And so I would be remiss if I didn't specifically shout out and thank the Atlanta Regional Commission and Georgia Tech, because without you, this project would not be possible. And so we greatly appreciate y'all's support and sponsorship of this. So Clayton County, we sat down and we tried to figure out how can we actually create a sidewalk blueprint, and what can help us make the decisions. And so what the overall kind of purpose of this project was to create that decision system, that decision matrix that we're going to use to where the county decides to put sidewalks in the community going forward. And so this is we were looking at enhancing safety, creating better access to the sidewalk system, and then focusing on equity and again, safety for all of our citizens in the county. So our kind of mold for this project is in this logic model. And so we understood that our priorities were smart and equitable mobility and the efficient and equitable project prioritization for the county. We had a lot of input for this project. So we had obviously our funding from ARC and Georgia Tech, our research partnerships with Dr. Gunsler and Dr. Rao, our stakeholder engagement sessions. So these are the sessions that we conducted with the citizens. And then our community collaboration. So these would be partners that we worked with, that partnered with us, like the Rotary Club of Clayton County. And then we actually had some of the Clayton County cities also play a big role in this project as well. And so we looked at multiple different ways of kind of getting the outputs. And so our data collection through our surveys that we created, which we'll talk about later on in this, updating and our sidewalk inventory. And so this is the work that our student data gatherers did, which will go into the creation of the database. And so this is going to be what we'll call our smart asset management system that goes out and actually looks at and inventories the current sidewalks, where they are and where they're not, along with where we best need them. We conducted many stakeholder engagement sessions, and so a lot with our commissioners, the cities, the different community groups that we worked with, and we were just given the opportunity to really do a lot of engagement with the community, because after all, this project impacts the community, and so obviously their input is one of the most important things for us. And then moving forward, this analyzing the data that we're able to collect through our survey, and then the final development of our decision support tool. And then hopefully it will lead us to the actual development of a smart pedestrian plan that we'll do soon. And so we looked at what the outcomes that we were looking for. So we were looking for equitable and efficient decision making. So we wanted to make sure that the decisions that we made about where the sidewalks go can be supported by data, and we can actually show people that this is why we're doing it and this is why it's the best place for it. We are also looking for community consensus. And so we didn't want to just put things out there. We wanted the community to be part of that process and part of this decision making. It will also improve our awareness in the community, or the community's awareness of potential future projects for sidewalks, and then create that stronger community collaboration that we all, as a government organization, really strive for in everything that we do, just reaching out and getting that community involved in it. And so, from a health standpoint, we looked at the medium and the long-term outcomes. So increased physical activity, increased accessibility, increased pedestrian mobility, and increased economic activity. And so these are things that, as we are able to make these improvements or to put the sidewalk out, we will we'll hopefully see the benefits in regards to that. And then, of course, long-term, decreased chronic disease rates, decreased obesity in the county, increased pedestrian safety, and improved infrastructure management. And so there's a lot of different outcomes that go about 3 or 4 different ways, but they're all directly related to having sidewalks and having in the community. And so our project timeline, we started in September of last year. It was almost a year to the day when we had the call where we were awarded this. And so we spent the first quarter, or the last quarter of last year, really organizing and conducting our community presentations. And then the research team did their literature reviews. I will say that in earnest, the project really kicked off in January. That's when we got real busy. We were able to bring in our student data gatherers to begin their work. We were developing and pushing out the community survey. And that is just a tremendous effort in itself, because there's so much information, so much value that we find from community input. And so we wanted to make sure that what we put out there and what we got was good data. Probably the crowning event for us was our community event that we held on July 22nd, which we'll show you in just a few minutes. And then we were able to onboard the interns from the Smart Community Corp program, June and Dimitri. And then kind of wrapping up the project, taking us through October, we'll give access to the Sidewalk SIM software to our transportation department so that they can actually begin to use the data that we gathered through here. The Georgia Tech team will continue to analyze the survey data. And then we have today our final project presentations. And so what I wanted to do was our communications division created a really nice video that kind of was the overview of our event. And so it's about a 5-minute long video. And so I really want you guys to see it.
Welcome everyone to our Smart Pedestrian Community Day here at the new Flint River Community Center. We're excited that you're able to join us in person today for our Smart Pedestrian Plan Community Day. Clayton County is the place where the world lands and opportunities take off our quality of life Smart Pedestrian project. We pride ourselves on being Clayton connected with you, the citizens and residents, to help determine the various ways to improve our communities and quality of life.
A lot of people put a lot of hard work into what we're doing here in Clayton County. I'd be remiss if I did not give thanks to the ARC and Georgia Tech employees who helped make this happen, and of course, our youth commissioners who are doing such a fantastic job. We need to know how we can improve and build upon our sidewalk network throughout Clayton County, how we can make our citizens safer. Fill out the survey, make sure that we all are doing what is in the best interest of our citizens, and let's make Clayton County a safe place to be.
It is a day for change here in Clayton County so that we can ensure that all of our citizens are safe. And I'm so grateful for you all to be here today, and hopefully you will get more people to come out and fill out this survey. But I promise you this, I'm gonna make sure that we finally get it done.
So over the past 3 years, we've had 12 different communities around the state of Georgia that have been involved in this project. And we're super excited to be working with Clayton County this year as one of 4 communities that we're working with this year.
We were looking for a definitive way to gather the information for sidewalks. So the county has different ways of kind of looking at sidewalk requests. And so what we're looking at with this project is to kind of bring all those disparate data silos together and actually put something in to develop this smart decision matrix that we can use to plan sidewalks throughout the community.
This is an index that we created using census data. And this really combines sociodemographic data, transportation behavior data, and other types of data that tell us where is the most need in the community based on the background research, right? So the areas that are darker have a higher need, okay? And this is just one insight. This is not all of it.
Sidewalks can also add to residential and commercial property values while increasing commercial sales and by individuals or those who patronize our local businesses.
It's definitely a marriage between public transportation and the safety of the citizens here in Clayton County.
And our Youth Services Division of the Board of Commissioners has just gone way over the top with this, with their help with running the student data gatherers, with bringing in the Youth Commission to help with this.
Just about everything we've done with this project, we've tried to make sure that our students and our youth were included, because it's important for them to see what we do as a county and how they fit into that, and then what it's going to look like for them in the future, and hopefully they'll all come back home.
The fact that there's an outreach versus, hey, go to this link, is always a better situation for citizens of this community than only having access by way of computer. I like the fact that they laid things out in layman terms as it relates to safety and pedestrian safety and just quality of life with having sidewalks and having access to businesses and having access to schools and parks. That's always a plus plus.
To take the survey, scan the QR code or access smartsurvey.claytoncountyga.gov.
Okay. So that really was a great overview of the entire project. I've been really proud to work with all of these, with the Georgia Tech team and the rest of the team. It's just been a fantastic project, and we really seen a lot of difference. And so this is just one of the pictures that we have. So this is our team members there at the event. This is the support that we have from the top. We have our COO, Dietrich Stanford, on the top left, our District 3 Commissioner, Franklin, on the bottom left, our chairman over to the right of her, Mr. Jeff Turner, and then Councilwoman from Forest Park, Kimberly, and I apologize, I don't remember her last name, but we just had a lot of support from a lot of municipalities for this event, and that made it really successful. And then, of course, any event or any project like this would not be successful if it wasn't for the community. And so having that community come out, especially given the times that we're in for this event, really made a big difference for us, for the community, and it really got the message out. And so for the research part of this, I'll turn this over to Dr. Rao. So Arthi.
Thank you, Jason, for the introduction to that project. Good afternoon, everyone. I am delighted to join you today and be presenting our research that has been an active part of this project. Joining me today is Dr. Randall Gensler, and he will also be speaking to the subsequent pieces of this research. So as Jason mentioned, my name is Dr. Arthi Rao, and I am a research scientist at the Center for Quality Growth and Regional Development here, affiliated with the School of City and Regional Planning. And so I'd like to introduce our research framework and really how we conceptualized going about using research to support this amazing project. And as you can see on the diagram, I have it divided into 3 buckets. So as we all know, the idea of walking or promoting walking behavior is as much objective as it is subjective. So it's not just about what assets we have, it's also about how people feel about those assets and how they perceive those assets. So the research was really designed to capture both objective information as well as subjective and perception-based information. So the first bucket that you can see was designing the smart pedestrian asset management system. And Dr. Gensler will be talking in depth about how he designed the methodology to capture the sidewalk inventory. The other 2 buckets around more perception-based data and other aspects of the built environment that really promote this idea of walkability and pedestrian behaviors. So the middle bucket was really around stakeholder engagement. And I think Jason already mentioned all of the different activities that were undertaken under that bucket. And then, of course, we have the third bucket, which was really understanding community conditions around land use and other types of aspects, which I will talk about shortly. So as you can see, 3 clean buckets under which we undertook various research activities. Next slide. So one of the main motivations and approaches that we used was to come at this using multiple data sources. So we began with understanding need in the community, what we thought would be high need areas, using American Community Survey data, which is publicly accessible. We also developed the sidewalk inventory, and again, Dr. Gensler will talk more about that. We also wanted to understand other perceptions and barriers to walking. So it's not just about having sidewalks, but what is perhaps preventing people from using the existing sidewalks optimally. So we also used the Clayton app, and we sought specific input around sidewalk conditions using that app. And In a minute, I'll show you some analyses we did with historical Clayton data and how the community could then use it going forward to perhaps incorporate into the sidewalk decision-making tool. And then, of course, a big component of this project was creating and deploying a survey to truly understand, how people felt about their environments, what were some of the barriers that they perceived, and really what was the priorities from the community standpoint in terms of how sidewalks need to be, where they need to be built, how funds need to be allocated, and so a whole lot of other ways of thinking through how Clayton County should go about making decisions regarding sidewalks. Next slide. So I mentioned the idea of creating a need-based index, and I think y'all saw a snippet of that in the video that we just played. But this was really understanding sociodemographic factors as well as transportation behavior and understanding where perhaps more transportation disadvantaged populations might be living, and so where then walking becomes more of just a recreational activity. It actually becomes an important component of the transportation system because folks need to get to transit stops and other types of access other resources through walking behavior. So we use this index to characterize what need might look like in Clayton County. And as you can see, the darker areas indicate communities that have higher need. Next slide, Jason. Another type of aspect of taking in community considerations was to, again, use the Clayton app. And this is what the front end looks like, where folks can input an area that they feel they're concerned about or might want to see a sidewalk be constructed. Next slide. So while we were waiting for those inputs, we also tried to look at historical Clayton app data to see what insights specifically we could derive. And we looked at, for example, how do people input these complaints? And then we also looked at the different categories of complaints that were being received through the Clayton app. And all of these are really to point towards barriers to walking behaviors. So there's we mapped crash rates, for example, and looked at hotspots in terms of where there might be crashes, which could be a safety-related concern that might inhibit somebody from walking. Next slide. But we also were interested in other types of barriers. So we looked at things like illegal dumping, which might again be an inhibitor from letting somebody use a sidewalk effectively. So as you can see, we had multiple categories, and all of this was to inform us into how people felt about their environments. And it's not just about constructing new sidewalks, but also encouraging the optimal use of existing sidewalks. So we came at it in multiple ways. But another important story here, which is not as obvious, is we see that a lot of these inputs are digital, and we see areas where there are no cases being reported. There's no points. So it may not necessarily mean that there's no problems there. It could just mean that the community needs to use another form of engagement that is aside from just digital engagement to reach those communities and hear about what they're feeling and what they're experiencing. Next slide. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Gensler to talk in depth about the sidewalk inventory system that he and his team worked on for the project.
I'll cover the next few slides here about the development of the inventory, and then some of the field inspections that we did as a demonstration for what Clayton can do and kind of the next stage of their journey. Clayton County is about 144 square miles, and what we first do for a region is we establish all the locations where sidewalks could be. In other words, it's kind of like a prototype network that includes all of the boundaries of the properties where we might expect people to walk. And there's about 2,400 miles of potential sidewalks if you look at the boundaries between the properties and the streets. And that's all done with a GIS process, and it's semi-automated. There's a lot of QA/QC that does have to be done once the network is developed. that network is 232,000 potential sidewalk links. So it's a pretty large network. And we have finalized the shapefiles. Clayton County will have to do the QA/QC of the node locations. We basically look at the nodes over the top of satellite overviews, and then drag the the little node where it needs to be so that it's right over where the crossing is. Next slide, please. To identify where the sidewalks are and are not, we used a Bing Maps fly-through process that we developed, and this was done with the students. So we have a graduate student in a dual degree program, that's civil engineering and city planning, who basically put together all of the sidewalk network in a structure that allowed students to essentially pace through or page through the images from Bing Maps to identify whether or not sidewalks are present or absent. Excuse me. And that's done by setting the toggle at the bottom of the screen. And so as you page through the screen, you can see that on the right, we can see a sidewalk is present. On the left, we can see that it's absent. And this was done for the entire network that was developed, minus about 400 miles. They did about 2,000 miles of sidewalks. Next slide. We did a little case study to show what can be done with respect to sidewalk inspections. Before I start this slide, I can tell you we also did the same kind of process. Instead of walking through the network, we're looking at the overflight imagery from the top down in order to identify where all of the curb ramps are located, and that's the ramps that a wheelchair would use at crossings, and also where the curb cuts are located. Curb cuts are the driveway crossings through a sidewalk. Turns out that curb cuts really are one of the biggest issues with respect to compliance with Americans with Disability Act standards. Most of the ones that were built in the 50s, 60s, and 70s have too high of what's called a cross slope. And so we're out in the field identifying whether or not sidewalk assets, that includes sidewalks, the ramps, and the curb cuts, whether they meet the ADA design standards based on slope and cross slope and passing area in inches and all the other standards. And also looking at the condition of the sidewalks to see whether or not there's enough cracking and pavement disjoints and the like that cause problems for navigation as well. So we went out into the field and did 1 mile of sidewalks at Terra Boulevard using our standard inspection tools, and did north and south, inspected 21 curb ramps and 26 curb cuts, driveway crossings, in 2 major intersection areas. Next slide, please. And you can see that we have conforming sidewalks that are a minimum of 36 inches wide with passing zones every 200 feet. There's lots of well-constructed crossings and ramps, but there's also some areas of problems that mostly the cross slope violations are the problem, but you have debris on the sidewalks and encroachments and obstructions and the like out there. So next slide, we looked at, or just showing you an example of a standard ramp inspection report that comes out. The data are physically collected in the field, getting the slope, the cross slope, the direction that the ramp is facing, and then comparing all of those values that are measured to the ADA design standards. And you can see in the third column there towards the middle of the worksheet, there are 2 problems. There's one, debris that's present that needs to be removed. That's not a big deal. It can be handled pretty quickly. And then a cross slope violation that's greater than 2%. This is a problem for individuals in wheelchairs. And again, like I was saying, curb cuts tend to have more of that problem. Let's go to the next slide. This is a curb cut. It's a crossing at Shell oil or Shell gas station. And you can actually kind of tell that the driveway ramp is cutting right through. And if you're on a wheelchair, you go from flat to being tipped towards the roadway as you're crossing over there. And so there's an issue with the ramp at either end, and also with the cross slope in the middle of the crossing. So anyway, these are the kinds of inspections that can be done by Clayton County, going out and inspecting each of the assets that have been identified in this process with the students. The students did a wonderful job. Historically, it turns out that it's actually cheaper and easier to pay undergraduate students at Tech to go out and collect the data. I'm having some second thoughts about that. The students did such a good job on processing the fly-throughs and doing the QA/QC that I think there's a method that can be derived here for more crowdsourcing of this kind of information. Next slide. And so we have more slides and more discussion that we can talk about with respect to the assets and the condition of the assets. I'm going to have to head out, though. I do have a class right now. So I'm going to run across campus, get to the class and do my lecture on environmental impact assessment. And Arthi's going to cover the sidewalk survey that we did. We're still analyzing a lot of those questions, but she's going to show some of the results that we have already. So thank you. I left my email in the chat if you'd like to get a hold of me. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gensler. So as Dr. Gensler mentioned, and I introduced earlier in the research section, community input was such a critical piece of this project. And so a lot of time was spent in adapting this survey. And I have to say that Dr. Gensler's team has used iterations of this survey in prior communities, but we spent a lot of time tweaking it and making sure that it was most appropriate for Clayton's use. And a big chunk of time was spent in developing the survey in ArcGIS application because we wanted to have geo-enabled data, which would give us locations in space, which also goes back to understanding neighborhoods better. So what you see here is what the front end of the survey looks like. And for many of you who may have taken the survey, you are probably familiar with how these questions were given to you. So next slide, please. So the predominant goals and objectives of the survey was to really understand how people felt about their neighborhoods. What were the barriers they perceived to walkability? What were their aspirations for walkable communities? Perspectives on equity and access in terms of resource allocation. Perspectives on which aspects of the pedestrian infrastructure was really important. That was it safety, mobility, was it access? Etc. So really, we wanted to get the pulse of the community in terms of where sidewalks need to be constructed, what investments need to be done, etc. As I mentioned, we've used previous iterations of the survey in other communities, so we have this continuous stretch of data, which we can now use to compare across communities and see how people feel differently about investment priorities. The survey was developed in Survey 123, which is an Esri ArcGIS platform, and which the neat thing about this platform is that it enables us to get place-based information readily without having to additionally geocode the data, which is really nice and efficient, especially when you're doing place-based research. We had a total of 356 responses, and then the Clayton County team did an amazing job in dispersing the survey through various outlets. These included community events, printing signs with QR codes through the county website, social media platforms, neighborhood associations, and through the Clayton County Board of Commissioners, various community assets that they really used pretty strategically to get the word out about the surveys. So that was a very effective process. Next slide, please. So we compared to make sure that we have a spatially equitable representation of opinions and perspectives. We compared where the survey responses came in versus concentrations of households. So we could see that there was no sampling bias in the surveys. There's still room for improvement. I think we did capture a lot of surveys in areas where there were a number of households, but I think there are some areas that we could definitely improve on in terms of sampling. Next slide. So when we analyzed the question of what were the important sidewalk features or what aspects of the sidewalk infrastructure were important, not surprisingly, we actually see a pretty even distribution of responses. And this is very similar to what we see in other communities where safety, accessibility, mobility, and walkability are all equally weighted. So everybody thinks that there's not one significantly more important feature than the other. Next slide. However, what's interesting here, when we ask the question, how would you like to invest in the improvement of sidewalks? We see a slightly higher preference for investment in safety features compared to the other three. And this is a little bit different from what we've seen in other communities where the sections of the pie chart tend to be fairly equally distributed. So something that again signals to Clayton County in terms of where they need to further channelize their community engagement, understand, for example, ADA access and those other policy levers that are really important aspects to safety. Next slide, please. This was also a very interesting question in terms of how the community thinks sidewalks should be funded. And again, we see a pretty high priority given to grant funding and local options, special purpose local option sales tax, where the community thinks the majority of the funds need to be coming from in order to fund sidewalk infrastructure. Next slide. Again, so the next steps in the project are to continue to complete the inventory, as Dr. Gensler mentioned, improve the sampling of the survey, and we are thinking about how further what types of improvements we can make to the survey, and then continue the video inspections, and then prepare the ADA transition plan. So those are some next steps that the county should focus on. Next slide, Jason. So I'll hand that back to Jason to wrap up our presentation.
Thanks, Arthi. And so we had a few challenges that obviously we didn't have any control over the pandemic, but when you have a project like this where the focus of it is community input, being in the pandemic and limiting opportunities for in-person and door-to-door information really hampered the process. And so we did the best we could to work around that. We did have some exciting results from this, but I think it had not been what we're in now, it would have been a little better. The community survey, because of some of the requirements, was a little long, but we think that we can do better, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. And then I'm just making sure that the public was clear that this project was about kind of gathering the information and building the decision system, and not actually installing and deciding where sidewalks is installed. It tempered the excitement a little bit. And so there was just a few of the challenges that we faced. There wasn't that many. It was, in my opinion, and I think the team would agree, it's been just overall a great success. And so we're really proud of our work. So some recommendations that we have that we're going to kind of take into consideration moving forward is creating a different survey, one that's a little shorter, but will provide a little bit better community citizen engagement. Also finding more efficient ways to facilitate the gathering of assets and community data, and to provide enhanced reporting and statistics. And so it kind of goes on the back of what Arthi said about their research recommendations, is we just need to keep gathering the information and refining it and making sure that it's correct. And then finding additional funding opportunities that leverages the results that we've had from this project so far, and that go to further the project's goals and initiatives. So future plans, we have been working with the research team. Dr. Kunzler is working in particular with a project called ITS for Us with Cobb County, that the data that we gathered would fit nicely right into that project. And so we are working with him and some folks on that. Using additional grant funding or finding funding so that we can get the students back on, or give the opportunities to other students to bring them on to help us gather the remaining information, that other 400 miles, and then obviously the QA, quality assurance, quality control part of it. And then using the information that we gathered to kind of finalize that priority index. And so where can we make the biggest input and the biggest impact in the community in the shortest amount of time? And so again, I would just like to thank all of the partners in this, in particular Georgia Tech and the Atlanta Regional Commission for this. It was a lot of work. It was a lot of sweat. Sweat equity went into it, but it was really great. The teamwork, and then the information that we gathered, and just reaching out into the community overall it was just a fantastic experience. And so Stephanie and Greg, that is it for our presentation.
All righty, thank you so much for that detailed presentation, especially the video that provided a great visual of how this project is working with the community towards innovative solutions. At this time, we will transition to a Q&A. If you have a question for our panelists about the project, we highly encourage you to put it in the chat box. I'll just get us started off with a question that I'm curious about that I think hopefully quite a few of you will be able to respond to. The team mentioned that the community event was kind of the crowning achievement of this project. What advice do you have for other communities who are looking to get quality engagement with citizens?
Stephanie, let me do this. Let me introduce the panelists first, and so so that they know who they're talking to. And so on our panel, we have 3 panelists: our Chief Operating Officer, Dietrich Stanford, our Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Sudha Reddy, and our Economic Development Officer, Erica Rock. And so that's our panelists. They give us a lot of great input at the event, and then from here. So I'm sorry. You want to ask the question again, Stephanie?
Thank you so much. Yes, of course. Sure. So the team mentioned that the community event was the crowning achievement of this project. What advice do you have for other communities who are looking to get that quality engagement with citizens?
Stephanie, I'll be glad to answer that for you. First of all, it's a pleasure to be with everyone today. I think primarily for us is that it also talked about our sense of community. I think oftentimes when you're putting on projects of this magnitude, we talk about the interface with government operations, but oftentimes we don't talk about the non-governmental organizations, the school systems, the other municipalities in place. And so when you're doing this information gathering session, we realized that we had to dig a little deeper, primarily with our non-governmental organizations, to ensure that ultimately they saw themselves in the project development. There's that saying, when people feel like they have an opportunity to give input, then they have a vested interest in ultimately moving the agenda forward in a community. So while we feel like it was a crowning moment for us in the community, it had a lot to do with the fact that the committee and the team did a great job in really getting some of our non-traditional partners at the table to ensure we got input. So we think that advice to future projects would be of benefit.
Thank you so much. We have another question in the chat. Will street classification bear on prioritizing where to place sidewalks?
That's a great question. So part of the framework that we're providing, we realize when you have empirical data that you can provide to your policymakers, it will play a huge role in determining funding levels. We're still trying to frame out what we think the criteria need to be. Clearly, we'll be working in conjunction with our Transportation Development Department on highest and greatest needs. We'll take the input from the surveys itself as to what the citizens are saying. And then more importantly, when we talk about safety nodes in the community, clearly that will play a huge role in providing recommendations to our Board of Commissioners. So clearly we haven't finalized what the ultimate criteria will be, but clearly that certainly will be part of the discussion.
Thank you. Another kind of follow-up question there. Does Clayton County have a complete streets policy?
Presently, we do not, Stephanie.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Dr. Reddy, I would like to get a little bit of your insight on how this project has bearing on public health in Clayton County.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for allowing me to participate in this panel and such amazing work. So it has a direct and as you saw in the matrix, both short-term, medium, and as well as long-term benefits to the community in terms of chronic disease, as well as areas in public health that we now are facing, especially in this pandemic, around mental health. All the research is showing that being outside, being able to feel safe outside is a very huge cornerstone in both community building, which is fundamental in mental health and just activity level and physical activity, both for chronic disease prevention, especially coronary artery disease, as well as hypertension and diabetes. In the short term, working in a pre-hospital environment where we are service providers for the county, just pedestrian safety. Sidewalks have been shown to reduce pedestrian traumatic events by over 30% just by their mere presence. So, and that impact both short term to those individuals who are affected, family members, and just the community as a whole. And then just as us as service providers, the impact that it has in terms of how we're utilized in the community. We are also taking care of heart attack, stroke. So it has a massive cornerstone public health impact on how we do our job, how we're able to do our job, and just the health and wellness of the community as a whole.
Thank you so much for that insight. Thank you for being with us this afternoon. Ms. Rocker, I'd kind of like to give you the same question from an economic development perspective. You know, what is the impact of this project?
Thank you for your question, Stephanie, and I'm excited about this great work. It's so important to have walkability infused as a part of any new development we have in the county going forward, and to take our existing outlay and be intentional about a sidewalk and walkability to commercial areas or parks or our centers, things like that, actually add to our quality of life spiel. When we talk about economic development in Clayton County, just as it is around the nation, it's no longer about location and sites alone, but companies want to know what is there for my workers to do? Where can they live? Where can their kids play soccer? I mean, we get specific questions, believe it or not, drilled down to that. So being a smart pedestrian community and having this initiative, I think will definitely give us, an extra feather in our cap on our marketing for the county, as well as the health benefits that Dr. Reddy mentioned. I'm attending our Georgia Economic Developers Association conference right now in Savannah, and we just had a great presentation on housing and how walkable neighborhoods used to be. And we somewhat got away from that and being more intentional with our ordinances and things, so developers can come in and it's already incorporated into the layout of the site. So thank you for your work and your leadership. And we're excited in Clayton to be one of the communities in Georgia participating.
Thank you so much. All right, we've got one more question in the chat. Does the County Planning Commission require new sidewalks be built during new construction? If not, would this policy be considered?
Well, I'll answer that a little bit, and I'll lean on my CEO to chime in some. Yes, in some areas of the county where there has been an overlay laid on top of a certain area within the county, that is incorporated into the language that we are looking for sidewalks to be incorporated, so that there can be like a furniture zone for outdoor seating for restaurants and for pedestrian use, so to speak. Again, and that whole goal was from an economic development standpoint, those things denote all types of health for your community. There's even an equation that'll say if you have outdoor seating or 10-foot sidewalks, you can project your economic development activity to go up in terms of people stopping and slowing down, taking a look to maybe open a new business from the small business standpoint. So yes, it's not countywide, but it's in some of our overlays.
Greg, I'll only add to Erica's point. She's 100% correct. A lot of our development standards, we do require that sidewalks are built out by the developer. I think the lesson learned for us in this particular exercise and through the process here is that we can do some enhancements to our respective ordinance in place. So point in case, if we have a developer that's coming in, we may have a standard in space now, but we even are looking at architectural designs, we're looking at standards as it pertains to sidewalks. So it may require a 10-foot pathway right now, but we may go to 12 or 14 because we realize bicycling and walking in that community is more prevalent. So therefore, our standard associated with our ordinance right now probably will change. But clearly, through going through the survey and hearing these listening sessions with our community, we figure that, one size don't always fit all. So we figure that in some instances, depending upon the zoning area, we may enhance the standard for the sidewalks.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all of our panelists and our presenters for being here with us this afternoon and giving us a lot of insight on this great work that's happening in Clayton County. At this time, I'd like to welcome Greg McCormick back to give us any final comments.
Thanks, Stephanie. So this is just such a great project. It's so great to see the focus that y'all have made in the community to really reach out and get the feedback and connect with the citizenry. That really makes a huge difference in these kind of projects because it builds trust with the citizens. They understand the project better and you get them involved. And so that's so important when the impact is all about the people and getting a system in place to develop sidewalks in areas that are going to be positive, make a positive impact for these people that you're trying to reach out to. So this was just a really interesting project that you guys did that brought together, the people as well as the technology, as well as some new data analytics processes to develop this system. And we really look forward to you finalizing the build out of the system and how it impacts your community, both positively for health and economic development and in any other way that it does for Clayton County. So thank you to the panelists. Thank you for the Clayton County team members. Thank you to the GT researchers, and obviously all of our partners that have been involved in Georgia Smart over the past year. So I would like to invite you back to our final two presentations here from our final two communities as part of Georgia Smart for the year. They're going to happen next Thursday. We're going to hear from the city of Valdosta. So that'll be September 23rd. And then we'll be hearing from the city of Savannah on October 14th. So we really hope you come back to the Smarter Together webinar here series to hear from the final presentations of those two communities. And I'll hand it back to Stephanie if you have any final words.
Thank you, Greg. And thank you all so much for joining us today. Please monitor our website, which is pengeorgia.org, for more information on all of our upcoming Smarter Together webinars. Thank you and have a wonderful day.